Because at the end of it, it comes down to, okay, this is why I'm acting this is my behavior. What is the reason why I'm acting this way, and how can I deal with this before I inflict more pain and hurt on someone else? Take, for example, men that just don't know how to express their feelings. Because, for example, it could be either two things. Growing up, their father never really showed them experience or gave them opportunity to express their emotions or express their feelings. Or they had the opposite, where there was no male figure to even know how to articulate that as a man. Or even the last one, where maybe a father was present but always suppressed that, and almost they saw a negative light of expressing emotion, so they never did.
You're listening to Journey to Fatherhood, a podcast that inspires and equips men to becoming more intentional and feeling more supported on the journey to fatherhood. Why wait to become a father before learning how to be a good one? My name is Chinedum, a young man also on his journey with a desire to help men become great fathers despite their past personal experiences. I'll be sitting with different guests to bring you great value, sharing their knowledge and their experiences as we all embark on this amazing journey. This podcast, though targeted towards men, ladies, you will also gain great value from the conversations. Now, without further ado, let the journey begin.
Hello once again, and welcome to Journey to Fatherhood. It's your host here, Chinedum, and I want to start by saying, hope you're doing great. Hope you're doing amazing. Right now we're experiencing that summertime. It is so hot, and the thing about the weather is that when it's cold, we pray that it's going to get warmer, and then finally when it's summertime, it's sometimes a bit too hot, and then we're asking ourselves, okay, I wish we could reduce the heat a bit. But I'm totally loving it, experiencing it, loving it absolutely. And that aside, I just want to once again just thank you all for the messages, the kind messages you've been sending across to myself on the platforms, the comments and the reviews that you've been giving to myself personally. I really appreciate the interaction we're having. And with that said, please, if you haven't done so, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel. Make sure you follow us on our podcast listening platforms and follow us on our social media platforms. It is a movement, and we're going to keep going to ensure that we redefine the journey to fatherhood and redefine what it means to be a man on that journey. Once again, if this is your first time, hello, welcome to the podcast. It's Chinedum here, and today, if you haven't watched last week's episode, I definitely encourage you to watch that after today's talk, because I'm going to be making some references to some of the things we talked about last week. However, today I want to focus more so on how we deal with pain as men. Let me repeat, I want to focus a bit more on how we deal with pain as men in our journey to fatherhood. If you remember correctly, last week's episode, we had a conversation, and the guest that we had on was Sterling Record. Once again, if you haven't checked it, I'll go listen to it. And when Sterling was talking, he talked about his experience coming from an upbringing of not knowing who his father was, not having that relationship, and finally realizing that there was so much built up anger, frustration, pain from all of it. And whilst we were talking, I shared how I experienced the same thing. But before we do that, just have a listen to what he had to say here.
I think the best thing a young man can do is deal with any issues he has towards his father. And then from that place, decide, what do I want fatherhood to look like? What did I miss that I felt like I needed? What did I get that I felt like was valuable? And what would I add? And from those three, I don't believe like in the idea of it being perfect every day, because that doesn't make sense to me, because we're not perfect individuals. We're progressing every day. So I would ask those three questions and kind of use that as your benchmark for how you want to live your life, and then reflect that to your children.
And after he shared this, just listen. I hope you listened to what he said. It was so important, because when he was saying these very words, I was just thinking about my own experiences growing up as a young man and how it affected my approach, because the lack of relationship with my father growing up. And I wanted to address that today, because I believe that a lot of men are still living life based on the past hurts that they haven't dealt with. Sterling, as you heard in that short clip from last week's episode, He talks about the importance of dealing with past hurts and pains before taking on that journey to find out what it is that you want to establish in your relationship as a father. And even prior to becoming a father, because we're here talking about the journey to fatherhood, I just wanted us to really start to ask ourselves, men, if you're listening, women, if you're listening and you know a man that this could be related to, just ask yourself, what are the certain types of behaviors that just, if you actually have to sit down and really tackle it and address it, you see it's relating to upbringing. For example, maybe the way a man deals with deals with women. Maybe he's experienced or he's observed that. We all know that, children pick up on what they experience whilst growing up. Child upbringing is so important. Now, I want us to focus on the pain, because a lot of it is the fear of rejection. Sterling mentioned this as well. Fear of feeling of being rejected. And I've seen this in so many men where as they grow older, because they never had that relationship with their fathers, they become almost resentful and almost trying to detach themselves emotionally. They tend not to be emotionally available, as people now say it. And I want us to really address that, because at the end of it, it comes down to, okay, this is why I'm acting this is my behavior. What is the reason why I'm acting this way, and how can I deal with this before I inflict more pain and hurt on someone else? Take, for example, men that just don't know how to express their feelings. Because, for example, it could be either two things. Growing up, their father never really showed them experience or gave them opportunity to express their emotions or express their feelings. Or they had the opposite, where there was no male figure to even know how to articulate that as a man. Or even the last one, where maybe a father was present but always suppressed that, and almost they saw a negative light of expressing emotion, so they never did. Some of those men end up growing up to become very detached human beings, and sometimes very violent and aggressive, and don't quite know how to communicate how they're truly feeling. And lately I've been seeing it quite too often, where we hear of issues of domestic abuse and issues of people in a marriage where they don't even know what their husbands are thinking about. They just never have that true intimate conversation with their husbands or their partners. And you ask yourself, okay, you grew up and you experienced all of these things, but surely you knew it wasn't right. So how have you been able to end up repeating the very same things you probably at some point growing up said you'd never do? It comes down to the fact that they haven't dealt with it. They haven't dealt with it. And this is why I encourage men, listen, the fact that you experience a certain way of upbringing growing up doesn't mean that automatically, because you experienced that you never liked that experience growing up, it doesn't mean that automatically you won't end up like that. It's a conscious effort that you have to make to fight and ensure that you don't repeat the same mistakes or repeat the same behaviors that were toxic for you growing up. Because I've seen men where they're holding up so much anger, and going on to the Sterling's point from last week, there's so much anger towards their father. There's so much anger and pain when they think about their relationship or the lack of thereof. And they don't deal with these things. They go into relationships and they find themselves becoming very distant in terms of their emotions. They just don't know why. Or sometimes they find themselves being very violent because maybe they grew up in a home where there was a violent parent. And I know that you guys have probably heard this story so many times, but I love to use it as an example. And the story is this. When I was in university, we were learning about psychology. I studied psychology at university. And I remember our lecturer, in fact, either in university in sixth form, I believe in sixth form when I was doing my A-levels, one of the teachers told us a story, a longitudinal study over the course of, I think, about 20 to 30 years of two young men that grew up in a family where their father was a drunkard and abusive. And both of them grew up, and they went and did a study with both of them years after. One of them had a wonderful, healthy family, and the other was in prison, a drunkard, and was convicted for abuse. And they asked both of them, why do you think you ended up this way? And both of them had identically the same responses in their sentences. The one that had a very healthy family, loving family, and had his life turned around, said, what would you do if you had a father that was a drunkard and abusive growing up? The other guy that was in prison said the same thing. What would you do if you had a father that was abusive and a drunkard growing up? The same experiences, but I'm sure that the guy that has a healthy family, he took some time to deal with that. Because sometimes we tend to forget that there are certain things that we have to force ourselves to unlearn. And so many men are still bitter. Okay, even if it's not about just the bitterness from upbringing and all of this, let's talk about life experiences. Now, we're going to go into, as we go along, we're going to be talking about the nitty-gritty of manhood, from relationships, dating, and all those stuff. And I'll definitely be bringing some guests that will have a bit more insight into that, to get their perspective, so that it's not just me talking. But one thing I have definitely found out, and in some areas of my life, in some stages of my life, I've experienced this, where as a man, sometimes you go through a stage where maybe you're dating someone, or you're trying to date and it didn't work out, heartbreak and whatnot like that. You become closed up. And there are some men that close themselves up to the point where they either do two things. They close themselves up to intimacy, or they just decide to objectify women and not even try to give any sense of vulnerability, because they're guarding themselves. So you find some guys that just go around just playing and toying with people's hearts and not really being serious to be committed, because in their mind, the desire to be committed almost makes them so vulnerable, and they never want to put themselves in a situation where there's a possibility of pain. And that also means that they haven't dealt with the pain of the rejection or whatever it was that happened in previous relationship. And then you have the other guys that just don't want to have anything to do with women because they're hurt. And some of them just end up now making generalized quotes about women are this, women are that. I understand that we have that in the other gender as well. But it's one of these things where if we don't tackle it, we will have so many grown men crying and hurting, but no one's able to hear them, but simply see the symptoms. Like a kid crying, babies, when they're crying, they could be crying for anything. But that's why you have to narrow down. Okay, you give them food. If they stop crying, okay, maybe they were hungry. Or you pat them on the back, maybe they were just frustrated. Or maybe you try to take off some layers of clothes to them, maybe they were hot. And all these different things. Or you check their napkins, maybe they made a mess of themselves, and you clean that up. However, unfortunately, there's a lot of men, when they're lashing out in all these behaviors, whether it's toxic behaviors or very detached behaviors where they don't want to open up, some men tend to be so tough to crack in the fact that they don't even give you an inkling of what may be causing it. So it's unlike a baby growing up. You can't just use a pacifier, you can't give them food to find out what it is, because they just don't want to address that. So for those men right there, and for those men you think that could benefit from this is for you. This is for them. Take some time to sit down and really ask yourself these tough questions. Have I resolved, or have I recovered from the pains of my childhood upbringing? And sometimes it's a very tough place to go. Sometimes it could be a very dark place to go, because as you recounting some of the memories that you thought you'd gotten over. But in order for you to just get over them properly, it's not just putting it under the carpet. Because the carpet, depending on the experiences you go through, that carpet could be raised and all these things come back in full force. I really encourage you, men, please, irrespective of your age, irrespective of the stage of your life journey, whether you're still dating, whether you're not dating, whether you're married even, or whether you're a father, please take some time to deal with this. And it's okay to seek therapy. It's okay as a man to go and sign up for therapy. It's okay to write things down, really reflect on those emotions, because there are some of them that you definitely need some professional help. There is no shame in getting that help. And we need to normalize dealing with childhood traumas, because a lot of them, that's what they are. childhood traumas that then end up defining a man completely without him even knowing that he's been defined by those upbringings and those experiences as a child. Let us deal with this, because I want to see more examples of men that are truly whole and healed and fruitful in their relationship and fruitful in their lives and fruitful in all that they do because they've dealt with that issue. There's no more need for faking it and just acting like everything's okay when it's not. Because if you don't deal with it now, your kids will have to suffer for the lack of attention you gave towards those problems, towards those areas of pain. Like, I use the example of myself because if I dated back, it took me a while before I finally realized that my father, of course, people can say, there are other behavioral things, decisions he made, but it took me some time to kind of try to understand the reason why growing up as a kid, I'd never really had a relationship with my father. I did some research, I asked my mother around, asked family members around, and I found out that he was from a polygamous family. And the family he was from, he never really had time with his father. He never really had a relationship with his father. And so as a lot of that, whether he wants to admit it or not, I know that it affected his ability to be open and be anywhat emotional or vulnerable with his own kids, because he just never received it. So he doesn't know how to give it out. And it's so important because all these things manifest themselves in different ways. You could have someone that's completely toxic. You can have someone that's completely distant in the way they relate with people because of these different experiences that they had growing up. So I encourage you as a man, as a listener, as you're watching this, take some time today. Take some time today to start to deal with these things. Take some time today to start to deal with these things. It's also for your own good. It's for your own good, because at the end of the day, you want to be able to live a happy, fulfilled life. Not just by the things you own or by the things you wear or by your titles, but internally knowing that, listen, I'm working on myself through and through. I'm dealing with the past traumas. I'm dealing with the root causes of all my pain. It is so important that we normalize these type of conversations. Again, referring back to the episode we had with Sterling last week. Once again, if you haven't listened to it, go check it out. In the episode, we talked about the importance of community. He talked about the fact that eventually he had to surround himself with the right community of men that now allow him and give him a platform to deal with these things. The anger, the pain, and all these things can be dealt with. There's no need for just accepting it for what it is when you can actually change what it could become. Those pains and those traumas and those tough times that you experienced could be what could actually revolutionize a new perspective, a new desire to be better. And not just a desire to be better, but an equipment of the skills and the know-hows of how to be better as a man, as a future father, as a present father. This is so important, and I encourage, even if you're not a father right now, please start working on these things. If you have a group of men, if you're more socially and emotionally aware about all these things, and you're emotionally intelligent in terms of addressing it and dealing with it, speak to the guys around your community. Speak to the friends that you know, the male friends that you know, and start addressing this. You could very well be the one that could help them break those deep-rooted pains, those deep-rooted areas of hurt that they haven't dealt with. I really, really implore and encourage you to do this. Because at the end of the day, we can talk all this talk, but if the work isn't being done, then it becomes of no use. Take the time. If it means you journaling it, if you want to kind of take baby steps in terms of starting to get to the point of dealing with it, if it means you bringing out a journal, write it down. Just find a book. The thoughts will come, because the more you stimulate your mind back to when you were growing up, the more you start seeing things coming together. Write them down. Even if you're crying whilst you're writing them down, my brother, please write it down. Because when you write it down, you can actually physically see how the dots connect. And even if it's not making complete sense, at least you can start tracking it. You can start tracking the tendencies that you have, the behaviors that you have, or the areas that you need to work on. The truth is, it's so much harder to work on character than it is to work on career. But so many times we value career over character. We value recognition, social recognition over character. Character being the intrinsic state of your heart, the intrinsic state of your being, from early as childhood experiences to what you are right now as a man and who you can become as a man and a father. So let us give the appropriate time for these things. Deal with those areas of pain, deal with those areas of hurt, because we need to get it sorted. The world needs more men that are dealing with their past traumas, that are sorting it out and coming out healthy on the other side. You deserve that for yourself. So with that, I know that this one is a very short sequence of sentences and conversation I'm having with you for this episode, but I really wanted to come here and emphasize this because I didn't want to rush onto the next topic without us really digesting this. That is all that today's episode talk is about. Let us deal with that area of pain so that it doesn't define the person we become. If it's not the childhood experience, okay, the experiences you've had as a man, where has your masculinity been put in question? Maybe you were growing up and you experienced bullying because people thought that you weren't manly or masculine enough, whatever that may have meant, like when you were growing up. So it's important for you to focus and look at this. Has me feeling bullied or being looked down upon growing up as a man affect my aggression or my temper? Is that something I need to work on? Then start working on it. If you need help, seek help. Because it's important that we change what it looks like to be a man. It is important that we change what it looks like to feel validated as a man. Because the validation starts intrinsically, not based on what they said you were or what you weren't growing up. And as cliche as this may sound, is the very same basic common sense thing that we need to address. But sometimes the reason why it's not common to us is because we've never actually had the opportunity to address it and tackle it the way we should. And that is no fault of your own, but the decision not to act from henceforth is your decision. So please do not just take this from one ear and let it sip out through another ear. Let us start doing the work. If you're gonna go into a relationship, if she said no, does not reflect. If you ask someone out and you really had a deep bond with someone and the relationship didn't work out, it is not a reflection of your masculinity. It is not a reflection of your value. It just means that you need to work on yourself to be able to come out from that pain that you haven't let go of. It does not mean that all women are not worthy of becoming precious in your life. It just means that you need to heal and find the right person. Because I believe so many men are hurting, and their way of responding when it comes to failed relationships or in that area of intimacy, their reaction tends to be very extreme, where they just become violent. They objectify women and just see them as nothing but objects. But inside they're seeking approval. They're seeking something to tell them that you are still worthy of being loved. Bro, if that's it, let's deal with it. Let's deal with it. It's not about just having the body count on all of those things. That is meaningless and useless when it comes to the real reason why you're even thinking of doing that. Because sometimes it comes from a place of emptiness. Most times it comes from a place of emptiness. Let us learn to love ourselves by working on ourselves. That is why it's important, because when you learn to love yourself, you learn to address areas that cause you not to really love yourself properly. Because sometimes we don't realize that the behaviors that we display is a sign of our lack of love for ourselves. So let us love ourselves. Let us work on those areas of pain and see the right progressive move to becoming the best man you can be. With that, it's been a pleasure. It's been an honor speaking to you. I look forward to hearing your reviews. Please make sure you like, share, and leave a comment. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also, we're now live on TikTok at J2Fatherhood, and on Twitter, as you all know, at J2Fatherhood as well. Instagram is Journey to Fatherhood, and please share this to someone, because you never know who might need it. With that, I want to encourage you to stay strong, and we're gonna finish strong. Till next week, take care.